Hi guys, this is Miss Hart-Townsley, and I've had a few assignments turned in for 1.04, which is our experiment design. And so I just want to show you a couple of things that might be helpful when you go to design your experiment. Okay, the first thing I want you to picture with me is organizing your experiment like so. And so let me go ahead and I'm going to close out of this real quick. Oh, I'll have to open that back up. Scoot this over actually and get it out of the way. And so if we think of our experiment in terms of all the different parts or components, we can see that we can organize it in a graphic organizer. Alright, so I'm going to use the example of surface tension. Alright, so for example, I've had some people say that they were going to measure the surface, or how does temperature, oops, and that should be an A. How does temperature affect surface tension of water? Okay, and so in your title, you would obviously have the dependent and independent variables. And so the independent variable, or the variable that you manipulate or change, is going to be the temperature of the water. Okay, something I want you to think about is that in science, we only measure in metric, and so in this case we're going to be looking at degrees Celsius. Okay, so then we go down to our levels or our treatments. This is going to be the actual experiment itself. Okay, so remember, we're changing the temperature, and so in the first level, or the control level, what is normal temperature of water, we could argue, is room temperature, and that's approximately 22 to, let's say, 23 degrees Celsius. Okay, so I'm going to put in here 23 degrees Celsius. So I'm going to have to somehow measure surface tension at 23 degrees Celsius, because in my second level I might heat the water up to, say, 30 degrees Celsius. Okay, and I don't have the shortcut here for the symbols, so I have to type it out. And then maybe I want to see if lower temperature, so maybe I'll go down to 10 degrees Celsius. Okay, if I only want to do 3 levels, that's fine. I can just put an X in this 4th level. Okay, so now I think temperature affects surface level, and I have 3 different temperatures. Okay, so what am I going to have to keep constant? If I want to see what temperature does to surface tension, I'm going to have to keep the amount of water the same, because that could affect surface tension. I'm going to have to keep the, however I'm going to measure it. So let's say I'm going to try to float an object on the surface of a petri dish, or maybe I'm going to take the warm water, the hot water, and the cool water, and I'm going to drop it on pennies to see surface tension. Okay, so let's do the penny one. So I'm going to keep the penny and dropper size the same. Okay, and maybe, well, that's actually 2, so I'll put dropper size over here. All right, so those are what's called my constants. These are the things that I want to make sure to keep the same, because they could affect surface tension, but I only want to measure temperature. Okay, and so here's where you get the fun experiment part. What are you measuring? All right, your dependent variable is what you're measuring, and at this point you have chosen surface tension. Okay, surface tension being the ability of water to act like a solid with like paper, when it's together. And so how are we going to measure it? And I'm using the example of number of drops on a penny. Okay, and I'm just changing those formats so you guys can see what I wrote there. Okay, so then our hypothesis is going to be a relationship between the independent and dependent variable. So I'm going to say if temperature, because that's my independent variable, and then you get to choose whether you say increases or decreases, so choose one of those two. Then what do you think will happen to the surface tension? Then surface tension will, and you have to say increases or decreases. Okay, so hypotheses are really simple statements that can be supported by evidence or data. And so if temperature, let's say if temperature increases, then surface area will decrease, or excuse me, surface tension will decrease. Okay? Now, in a science laboratory and at our home laboratories, we know a sample size or the number of repeated trials. We want to go with a minimum of 3. So you would do this 3 different times. And then once you've done this 3 different times, you compare your data back to your control. And so your control, which is the part of the assignment that I think most of us are having an issue with, the control is the baseline or the room temperature water. Okay, so hopefully by setting this table up, you guys can see how we can set up our experiment. What does that look like? I'm going to bring the boogie board back up here. Okay, so what does that look like is, over here, make it a little bit larger. Also don't need that ugly background. Okay, so for example, I've got my 3. Maybe you've got a pan of hot water, so we were going to do, I think it was 30-degree water. We've got 23-degree water, or room temperature water. And we've also got cold water. Okay, so in your procedure, you're going to let us know how you're going to heat, how you're going to get those temperatures, how you're going to measure them, and so forth. Okay, but when it comes to the actual experiment, we're going to have our pennies. That's Miss Hart's rendition of a penny. Okay, and then we're going to drop those different temperatures of water. Okay, if you remember from this experiment, you've probably seen it before. Let's say this is the surface of the penny. As you start to drop water, it's going to start forming this bubble. All right, and the reason that water doesn't run off to the sides is because of surface tension. And so what your hypothesis states is that this really hot water is going to have fewer drops than this really cold water. Okay, so we're going to still get that bubble, but it's going to, maybe, let's say the cold water holds 45 drops. The room temperature water holds 35 drops, and the really hot water only holds 25. You're going to repeat that 3 times to get 3 sets of data. Okay, you average the data. So let's say we get 25, 20, and 22. So you would put the average right here, average for the medium, and average for the really cold. And then you can actually make a statement and say, my hypothesis was supported or not supported. Okay, so hopefully, my drawings aren't the best, but hopefully that helps a little bit when it comes to experiment design. And when you are writing your report, don't forget to label those variables. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Thanks.